he's been in the captain of some fairly mediocre Rangers sides over the years. But I think if he was to write his own ending here, that would be it, wouldn't it? To go out with another title, a second title, to go out as a winner. And funnily enough, I've written a piece for tomorrow's newspaper, and it's kind of about that. This James Tavernier might be the only player I've ever known that could win such a long service medal at Rangers. 11 years. I'm talking about players at any clubs. Any guy that gives a football club 11 years, captains that club for most of that time. And yet, do you know what? His legacy is probably going to be decided with what comes over the next 3 or 4 weeks at the end of those 11 years. Yeah, if he wins this title, he walks away and he'll be adored and he'll be remembered for it. And if he doesn't, if Rangers fall short, if they fall flat in their faces again as they get close to the finishing line, it'll just be another example of a guy that couldn't lead them to where they wanted to be. And I mean, it's grossly unfair to think about the 11 years of service that he's put in, and yet it really will come down to this next 3 or 4 weeks how he'll be remembered.
I do totally agree with you in the sense that he's been a victim of misfortune, a victim of timing, if you want to put it that way, because, yeah, listen, there will always be people who point out certain deficiencies to his game. I don't actually think he's as bad a defender as some people seem to suggest. I think when he was at his peak, you're talking about part of a Rangers team that conceded 13 goals the whole season. So I don't think you've got big, huge gaps in your game if you're sort of leading a defence that's racking up those kind of numbers. But I think in general, especially the last few years, when you think about the kind of players he's had to have round about him, the mistakes that have been made, recruitment, the mistakes that have been made by the players round about him, I think it's harsh to sort of single him out and be, right, he's the guy.
It's not fair in the slightest, Andy.
It absolutely isn't.
Reality.
Yeah, I mean, and especially in the city we live in, when things can be so unforgiving. But for me, he's been a fantastic servant. I think he would get in to most, if not all, of the great Rangers teams. I think in terms of right backs at the club that they've had down the years, it's only a very small number that you would say have got a better pedigree than James Tavernier. You talk about the performances that he put in, leading this team to a Europa League final. I mean, he was absolutely phenomenal. The 2 legs against Dortmund, the game against Leipzig at Ibrox, these were nights when he stood head and shoulder alongside the best that competition had to offer. As I say, the season before, an invincible league triumph. Fantastic achievements. But the problem was that he joined the team when they were in the Championship. He then goes into a Premiership campaign. Spends a couple of years with the club just making one mistake after another in terms of recruitment, in terms of managerial choices. Obviously, then when Gerrard comes in, it's a building process. But undoubtedly, the club then makes mistakes afterwards that. And again, he's the guy being the common denominator through it all that pays the price for it. I just think he's been, you'll look back and say that fate could have been an awful lot kinder to him during this period. But I don't think there's any doubt that on his day, he's one of Rangers' best ever players.
But do you kind of get where I'm coming from in this one, Andy? I think, and it might be a kind of recency bias thing, I get that. This might be because we're right here and the now of it. But when he gets to the end of this season, if he's walking away and the ticker tape's coming down and he's holding that trophy again, I think that the kind of broad brush kind of painting of his legacy and the whole thing will be, yeah, that's success. It ended with success. But if it ends, because Rangers are where they are right now, it would just highlight the fact if Rangers fail to win this title, he'll get the finger pointed at him again, just say, look, there's another example, a guy that was close but no cigar.
Yeah, listen, if they were to lose this league title, then I think it just very much continues the entire theme. And maybe for some people, it'll be a drawing the curtain of this whole period. And, after, as I say, being the common denominator, it can be a totally fresh slate for next season. But I'm not entirely sure that if he wins this title, that the people who criticise him for only winning 3 titles or 3 trophies in 11 years are going to go, well, there's a 4th. That changes everything. I'm not sure. But listen, I think for his point of view, it would be nice to see him. He's at times I've felt for him. Having been one of the guys that has to speak to him and spoke to him a lot after these, repeated letdowns. He's been, shunted out and asked to be the sort of the guy who explains it all when he comes away with this, trademark. It's disappointing catchphrase that he's got. I felt for him because it's not been easy, and I say a lot of these disappointments that he spoke about haven't been his fault or haven't squarely been his fault. He contributed to them, but for me, I think he's okay. You can point to things like the tough time he's had against Maeda, the sort of some of the mistakes he would make, sort of defending the back post back in the day. But I think he's dug out of the holes he's put Rangers in. I think he's dug them out of far more down the years. I mean, you're talking about a right back that scored 144 goals. I mean, okay, a lot of them penalties, but a lot of them have not been penalties, and 100 more assists.
148 assists, Andy, is that right? I mean, that's astonishing.
Just frightening numbers for a right back. So, listen, as I say, I caveat it with all the penalties, but set pieces. But I just think he's more than justified his place in the Hall of Fame at Rangers. I think it'd be really harsh for people come the end of this to start pointing fingers if this isn't to be the year that the send off that he hopes it will be.
Regardless of that, Andy, regardless of how this season ends, because this season's just mad as a jar of wasps anyway, so it's difficult to try and predict. But regardless of how it ends this season, would you have wanted to put a contract in front of him, or do you think that now is the appropriate time to make the split?
I would have been tempted to give him another. If it was me sitting in Danny Roll's shoes, I'd have been tempted on the basis that there's not that many senior leaders in that dressing room right now. And obviously, we did try to address that last summer, bringing the likes of Joe Rothwell, but obviously Russell Martin and the likes of Kevin Thelwell got that one badly wrong, a few other ones. So I would have been tempted maybe with the offer of, some sort of pathway into coaching, but obviously hearing him speak earlier on this week, as this guy probably discussed last night, I think he said he still feels he's got 4 years left in his legs. I'm not entirely convinced, certainly not at this level. I think you're seeing times where he can be targeted. I think he was targeted against Falkirk last week, but I think there's also occasions where his quality in the ball has been vital to Rangers. I even think back to the League Cup semi-final defeat to Celtic. The fact that Rangers were only 1-0 down in that game at half-time, but it was with his sort of leadership and his drive that they got them back into the game in the second half. I think even at one point he gets sort of moved into midfield before Rangers sort of legs tired in extra time. But I just felt even that day you saw what James Tavernier is all about in terms of how he can drive a team on. So I'd have been tempted to give him maybe another year, but on the proviso and on the basis that he knows it's he's might only play 10, 15 times. But I certainly think that there could have been a place for him in this